Good morning. Happy Monday. What's up, Jordan? Morning, Brian. Sean, what's going on, man? Little slow warm-up music for you guys this morning. Hey, Perry. Perry, I'm showing my age. This is like Pink Floyd. Taylor, welcome. I feel like I was just talking to you, man. All right, let me get my clock going. All right. Good morning. Enough indulgences. Little Pink Floyd to start us off there. I didn't know if anybody would catch the innuendo there in the title, but I was reading this intro paragraph to a book I'm reading, and I just thought it kind of captured exactly what we're talking about. So I'm going to read the paragraph now that I got the clock running, and give you a little bit of some thoughts about that, and then we'll get into any other sort of riff where that takes us. We'll see where it goes. So the paragraph, I just thought this was such a great intro. In the past quarter century, the American medical system has stopped focusing on health or even science. Instead, it attends more or less singly minded to its own profits. And although, as a healthcare professional, that's a bit humbling to start your day with that. But I thought that it really hits on exactly what we're trying to get after here, right? What we're really trying to look at is the fact that this machine is so out of control. It is spinning so wildly out of control. And a big part of the reason why that is because we're not really focused on our charge. We're not focused on what we're trying to do. And really it's become sort of this big profit engine. So just to give you some background, although I put this little graphic on Twitter, if you haven't seen it, you can find it. And that is the idea that as the portion of GDP has gone up, how much healthcare really has been and how much of a factor it really is. In an $18 trillion, $19 trillion economy, healthcare accounts for almost $3 trillion of that, somewhere around that $3 trillion mark. It's a fairly large percentage. I've recently heard that it is the single greatest sector, that is the number one sector as far as what we produce as a country. So that should give us some concept of exactly how big this thing is. And I think that what that really does is, at least for me, it gets us into, well, how do you change something that's that massive and that big? And that's kind of the conundrum, right? That's the constant problem that we're trying to solve. So when we really sort of look at it and think about it, it comes down to the fact that we've got to re-engineer the system entirely. That it can't just be, sort of a single change, that we're going to make a single simple change. And that gets us back to that idea of moving a herd, moving a population. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit because we've got a lot of the science on our side. We've got a lot of the information. But if you sort of put any stock into that first quote, that we're not even focused on that anymore, that the system itself is more or less focused on its own profits, and that finance is driving everything, that the finance piece that's driving everything is really an inward-looking finance of the medical system itself. And the reason why this got in my head was because last night in our cohort, Paul asked a question on the way out the door, which I thought it was a great question. And he said, it seems to me some of the data is showing that employers don't care as much as they maybe once did about ROI and profits, and really what they're trying to get to is well-being and health. And I think that's, it's really poignant, and it hits exactly what we're trying to kind of think about. So to do that, we've got to get into this concept of this is not a program, right? This is not some sort of a thing that you do or that you deliver. And that population health or prevention or health promotion or however, whatever aspect of this you really want to be in, all the way from the societal level, change the entire thing, down to the individual level, help a person make changes in their life. We've got to kind of think about that, at least, wrestle with the fact that this is about health. This is about well-being. This is not about dollars and cents, except for the fact that we are a big portion worried about our own dollars and cents. And so how do we actually get there? So if you can think of it as a system, a production line, people kind of going through, production. And I recently had someone kind of explain it to me this way. Think of a car comes in as raw materials first, and, then some magic happens inside the manufacturing plant, and a car pops out the other side, and it's sort of an interesting thing. Then we have to think about what's happening in the manufacturing plant, right? Like, that's the black box. Person goes in to the healthcare black box of the system, a bunch of crap happens inside of there, and then person comes out. Now, we can decide that we don't like maybe how the person comes out, and I know some of us are very unsatisfied with the fact that person just kind of comes out as sick as they went in, and maybe sometimes sicker because they got 3 other things that they've identified now. But what's happening inside that black box, what's happening when the person enters the machine is really the question. And I think that's the question that we've got to try to boil down and get to. And so what I think is happening, right? And again, I can't say this for sure in every situation and interaction, but we get a person who's walking in the door, and they're walking in the door a little bit behind the 8 ball to begin with, for whatever reason. Whatever the case may be, the general populace is sicker. So they're walking in the door, and then what's happening is we are putting labels on things. We're constantly trying to name whatever it is, put a term on whatever it is that this person presents with, instead of getting down to what are the root causes of it. And as soon as we get to that, as soon as we get to what are the root causes of this thing that we need to label, then maybe we start treating the cause and not the label. But that seems to be where we go wrong. We get in there, and in the black box, people are sort of chasing whatever the label might be, and oh, you have this, and so the book says, or the prevailing wisdom is we do this when you have this label. If you really boil it down, if you really get down into the weeds of this thing, it's what are the roots of that particular label. And when you get there, what that really is of course all those same basic things that we talk about, right? Are you moving? Are you moving enough? Are you eating decently? Are you eating too much? Are you managing sort of acute stress and distress? Are you stressing the system a little but not too much that it goes into distress? And then after that, are you able to sustain whatever it is that you're doing? Is there a sustainability factor here? Can you endure? And then that final piece of, do you have the support around you? Do you have both the system support, the machine, the medical system, but also the social support, the support of your environment? Does it make it easy to continue whatever you need to do? And so that whole idea of what's happening inside the machine is critical for us if we really want to begin to flip this thing and change this thing. Now, thankfully, there are people out there, such as employers, who want to change this thing, right? Exactly, Jordan, lack of healthy behavior disease, right? So that's exactly it. The outcome, the label, tends to be what we focus on instead of what are those roots and what are the things that we can really get after. If we start to identify the roots, and I'll make the argument all day long, those roots are very simple, common roots. I think that they're you keep boiling it down, we keep getting down to very simple, straightforward things, then we can decide how do we re-engineer the pathway in the machine. So if we're going to re-engineer the pathway in the machine, and say, hey, like when a person enters, the first thing that we need to do is dive into what those limiters are and what their goals are, then we can start to say, all right, well, I see you want to be here and you're currently here. What's the best, most efficient way that we can get you from A to B? How can I get a car to come out the other side in the fastest, most elegant way possible? Not that I'm going to let, just continue to sort of do what we've always done because cars come out the other side. But what's the most efficient way to get you to point A to point B? And I wonder, are we starting the conversation with anybody who we meet? So let's start it at the individual level. That's easy. Hey, what's your vision for yourself in the next couple of years? And that's a hard thing to talk about, but but because it's hard to conceptualize for some folks. But if we don't know that, if we don't ask that question, we couldn't possibly provide an efficient and elegant solution. On the flip side, we might be want to talk to people at the policy level and say, hey, look, for society, what is our goal? What's the most important thing for society in your mind, you as a leader? What's the most important thing? Is it that people have a high quality life? Is it that people live a long life? Is it that people make a lot of money? Is it that people, whatever? Like, whatever that is, that lets us to get it down and say, okay, what's stopping that? What are the limiters? And then, okay, how do we actually change it? So that's the machine concept. That's a systems mindset. That's the idea that we can build, a standard sort of way of going about it and usually get the same output on the other side. And I think that what I want us to be thinking about, as whether it be a profession or as providers or even just concerned citizens, it's that right now there is no real systematic approach. It's person enters the machine, gets something that meets their expectation or doesn't meet their expectation, maybe gets carted off to someone else to start the machine again, goes through that whole mess again, and then maybe someone else to start again, and so on and so on and so forth. And that if we don't have this idea of navigating from point A to point B efficiently and really thinking about, hey, how can I, in the least steps possible, make the most elegant solution on the other end, that we're essentially missing the boat. So, what are sort of the things that you can do today, right? Like, what are things that we can do today? The first is to, change the expectation. Start to get into the minds of anyone who we talk to, whether it be patient, whether it be family member, whether it be, boss, whether it be, colleague, like whatever, the fact that if we boil down almost all of the disease that we face every single day, whether that be pain or whether it be all the way up through, chronic, health conditions that are killing people left and right, they boil down to some very simple domains. And those domains allow us then to sort of understand which pathway and engineer it appropriately. I think that we're really, really missing that boat, and we're really, really paying the price for missing that boat. And that, I think, comes down to a very simplistic idea, but one that is nonetheless real. And that is that we are so focused on correctly labeling this thing and then treating it by whatever the prevailing wisdom is for that label that we discount the fact that we're not at the root anymore. Okay, so we've now thought about this idea of a systems-based approach, and now I want to kind of point the flip side. This is why it is not a program. And I know that's challenging for folks who are trying to get into this space. This is why when you walk into the door, if you sell a program, if you sell hey, we're going to get everybody up and get them moving, and that's all that we're going to do, why you have inherently failed, as soon as you've walked in the door. So in my 3 minutes and 45 seconds, the reason why is because we know complex systems are exactly that. They're complex. One factor plays on another factor, which changes things on the third factor. And that's really where we get into really get into some trouble here. So what does that mean? It ultimately means that we have to keep a completely open mind and know that we may have the solution, so let's pick exercise. It's a huge viable potential for a lot of problems, but it's not the only one. That we have people who exercise every single day and still wind up diseased and or injured and or whatever, right? So it's not the only one. We know that nutrition is a huge factor that we could play on, but it's not the only one. We know there are people who eat well and still have, sort of problems that pop up. So we've got to look at the whole comprehensive piece of this and really think of it as that tangled ball of yarn. And when you're going to untangle a ball of yarn, if this thing is completely complex and tangled, you don't start yanking on strings and just constantly yanking on the same one, hoping that it will let go if you just pull harder. That's a program mindset. You look at it, you step back, you zoom out, you look at the entire thing and say, well, what if I gently pull this string? Okay, if I gently pull that, oh, great, I'm getting somewhere now. Okay, got to stop on that one now and pull on the other one. That's a machine mindset. That's a systems mindset, is looking at how every single factor plays another one. Now, that gets really complicated, and I think because of that, it makes it scary. But if you can just start thinking about what is the black box in your connection point, whether that be your connection with patients or your connection with your community. When people bring you a problem, whatever that problem is, I hurt, I'm not as happy as I want to be. My body doesn't live up to the challenges that I throw at it at work. Like whatever. Okay, they walk in the door with that problem. How are you dealing with that? Are you giving them a systematic, articulated, step by step, like, hey, we're going to go through this in a systematic way and we're going to figure this thing out one thing at a time? Or are you giving them magic? Are you giving them a black box? Are you giving them something that keeps, the answers hidden, which ultimately just pads your pockets? And I think that's really at the root of what we're struggling with. When you give someone a systematic approach, when you really allow them to look at it step by step and say, hey, I'm doing this because of that. I'm doing this because of that. I pushed this button, I got that result. Okay, now we've got a systematized mindset. It also provides a tremendous amount of hope for the person. Because then all of a sudden it seems less random. It seems less hopeless. It seems less like a tangled ball of yarn, right? It's actually just simply going at it in a systematic way. And yeah, so Perry says that sounds a lot like good clinical reasoning. It is exactly the same. It's just that we're not doing it we're doing it in an expanded level of in our domain, right? Like, so instead of just simply saying, hey, I'm comfortable peeling back the clinical reasoning of your, body part, whatever that is, it's let's look at you at a greater whole and let's look at all of those things that we have to reason through. And that people are so busy in their lives and they're so, life is so hectic and there's really so much, despair. I hate to use that term, but that's really what it is. There's so much of that it's overwhelming that people can't see that we have to pull gently on the strings to unwind the ball of yarn. And so if we know that people aren't moving enough, if that's the construct, if that's the axis that we decide, then we can start to think about elegant solutions to help people move more. Then we can talk about engineering the environment to do so. We can talk about, giving people, cues to do so. We can talk about ways to change behavior. We can do all of those things, but not until we realize that the string that we want to pull is a simple, elegant solution to get people to move more, whatever that might be. So that's kind of the main message, and perfect timing. That's my 15 minutes of fame here this morning. But that's really what I wanted us to start thinking about, is that if we continue to push people into this black box machine, or allow people that we care about to go into this black box machine with the idea that it's somehow magical, that something happens inside there that isn't just logical and isn't systematic, the further we get away from health and the more we get toward focusing on profits. So I'm going to finish the way I started. I'm just going to read that paragraph again because I just think that we've got to get that in our heads and we've got to be thinking about it. In the past quarter century, the American medical system has stopped focusing on health or even science. Instead, it attends more or less singly minded to its own profits. If that doesn't punch you in the gut right off the bat, because we are all a part of that, I think it probably should. It's Monday. It's the beginning of the week. We got a lot we can cover between now and this time next week. Very, very simple. Make it count. Thanks for being here.